And then that leads us to the review. We are going to be talking about the Dilluvia project. It was originally in 2015. The designer is Alexandra Garcia, and the artist is Harold Lieske, who was our artist last week, and Katie Welch. And the publisher, the original publisher was Spielworks, but the more recent version, the 2018 release, was put out by Tasty Minstrel Games, Seth Jaffe and Company, fan of the pod, and we
Michael
are
Mindy's, yeah,
and we are fans of them. Trey, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Dilluvia project?
Okay, so the story of Dilluvia project is that a doomed mankind is relocating by constructing a futuristic city in the clouds. And as a player, you are playing essentially competing developers who are help build this city and facilitate humanity's transition to a cloud-based existence. You score points in this game for being recognized as someone who has grown the city's population or facilitated its growth. And like the key word here is recognized. More on that later.
So I don't have to actually do anything. I can just be recognized for doing things?
You have to do things and be recognized for it. Prestige.
Ceremonial plaque on a cloud.
Got it.
Getting your prestige is as important as the things you actually do. You need to be recognized for what you do in this game. I would say the core of the game, most of it, it's kind of like there's a beginning segment of each round and then a secondary segment. The core of it is worker placement. Mm-hmm. You may place workers on a single action, but you can place multiple workers at the same time. So sometimes, like if it's a grab resource action, you can place one and grab one, but you can also place three and grab three. So there's some interesting tempo things. There's some other games that do that. And because you start with like 6 workers or 5 workers plus kind of a larger worker that's a super worker, it's a little bit more granular than something like Agricola where you start with 2 workers and each action seems really important. Mm-hmm. This you can kind of divvy things up. I mentioned like there's a super worker that we've just called the Grande, but I don't think that's what they call it in the game.
It's just whenever you have a larger piece than the other ones, it's El Grande.
Yeah, but there's a rule that if you go to a certain action area in the game and you're the first one to put your Grande there, you're going to get this especially powerful extra bonus. And so where you place your Grande each round is very important.
Especially because only one Grande can score per region. So if I put my Grande into the money-making area, you cannot get an extra money bonus by placing your Grande there. You got to put him somewhere else, right?
Well, so that's like a major decision you're making every round is where's my Grande going to go? And we may be racing for the most desirable Grande positions as well.
Yeah. And Grande can go where your Grande is, but if your Grande is there first, then my Grande just becomes a very pedestrian, ordinary piece with no special abilities.
So wasteful.
Are people going to start calling it the Grande? I think they may. I think it's like double fun in Tichu. I think we're just coining our own phrases and then talking about it as though that's what it is in the game.
You know, this is a point, by the way, that I think we're going to come back to when we start talking about analyzing the game, because I think it's getting to something a little bit larger that happens with this game. But nevertheless.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I think Grande is a good term though, because I think if you're a brainiac, you know what we mean by that. Like, you know, you immediately this is a meeple, a super meeple of which you have one that's going to break the rules in some slight way. So, at the center of this game is actually like the map of the city. And so the various kind of actions you can do as part of this worker placement game is you're collecting resources, you can collect currency, you can change your turn order, and you can build buildings. What may not, and that's all very kind of like typical worker placement stuff. What's a little bit different about, or is not typical of worker placement or makes this game unique is that you have to kind of like buy the real estate you're going to build on later. Like that's an intermediate step that's really important. And because it's a cloud city, you have to kind of grow out organically. It's almost like you're laying the foundation of your buildings in the cloud city before you can build on top of them.
Right.
And then once you build your buildings, you're building your functionality. So you have a lot of kind of like engine building in terms of what buildings are you choosing to build in building your city building engine. So in addition to this kind of like worker placement phase, which is probably like 75% of the game, there is also a interesting what they call market phase at the beginning of each round, which is a 4x4 grid of rewards that are very, very powerful generally. And we're going to fly our little Zeppelins up there, and in turn order, we're going to kind of like buzz straight across this market, gobbling up rewards, but we have to kind of pay for them. And so, we're choosing where our Zeppelin's going to go, and then like the reward that's closest to you is going to cost $1. The one that's one step away as you buzz across is going to be 2, 3, 4. So like if you want to gobble up an entire row or entire column, that's $10. The problem is that $10 is a ton of money that you don't have, but these still tend to be really effective buys, and so there's a certain amount of interesting gaming going on in terms of like grabbing turn orders so you can get the great market rewards, and then you're placing your thing to like, well, I don't think Ben's actually going to grab this with his third pick, and so maybe I can snag it by coming from another direction. And I'm not sure, I don't know what other game kind of does something that has this like market phase like this. Like it's the more unique part of this game.
It's like, I think it's actually like an excellent element of this game to start up every round saying, okay, you get to sort of like have these bonuses. Some of them are going to be ongoing bonuses. Some are once per round. Some are you can use this once in the future, or some are immediate. And it feels like to a T, they're all essential. Like it feels like every single one of them is so important to claim. And God, you want them so badly. And having that choice is a great choice, especially because, I mean, realistically, there will always be some that you need really the most. Like, oh, I need that tile and I need that tile, but they're not in the same row, or are they in the same column? So I have to decide which do I want, and then which are the other ones in that row or column that I want. And I think actually the market phase may lead to probably the crunchiest decisions in the game. I think it's amazing. And the thing is that if you are not going first in the market, like everyone puts their Zeppelin down, but if I put my Zeppelin down and I'm going to go after TREY, for instance, and TREY pulls a tile off, let's say TREY has a row and I've chosen a column that's going to intersect with his row, and he pulls a tile off that intersects with my column, then what happens is I will get like 1 coin of compensation. And let's say I'm third or fourth in turn order, you could theoretically get 2 to 3 coins of compensation. And money is so tight in this game that there's also kind of another game that you're playing, which is, well, I know I'm not going to have a lot of great picks because I'm going last, but if I can get some money out of this, that could be the difference between me claiming a piece of land or not.
Yeah, I think that the spiritual successor to the market in this game is probably Age of Steam is one thing. The auction for the special abilities in each round is kind of a little similar in some ways. And I would also say Dune, strangely enough, in the auction for those treachery cards. It's sort of what are the advantages you are going to purchase and gain that are going to allow you during the worker placement part of the game have just that little leg up that is going to allow you to accomplish plans you otherwise wouldn't, right?
Yeah. Well, the way each game is unique in the way that the market tiles get laid out. Yeah. Because I think like there's nothing else that's different from game to game. And so these market tiles can be like, they can be instant reward, resource rewards or cash rewards. They can give you one-time powers. They can give you ongoing powers. They can give you end-game scoring. So like how you balance what you're grabbing there is a big part of the decision. And so to me, this feels a little bit more like a Through the Ages type of thing, where you're grabbing up cards, but it's all done somewhat simultaneously because you have to commit to your like Zeppelin path, and then people are actually going to execute it. But like your big strategic choices are made here in the market phase. When we played our game last week, Tom, for example, you bought a single tile that gave you an ongoing power that absolutely defined your game, and that you were allowed to kind of like jump forward and purchase buildings that weren't available to the rest of us, and you were able to buy them early, and that kind of defined your game.
Yeah, I flogged the heck out of that. Yeah, I guess the reason I'm saying more the Age of Steam and Dune is that it's a phase in which we are all competing together for those resources. The first player to choose something in the market is basically locking down a row or a column that only they can buy. They're going to be able to buy from that column before anyone else gets to buy. And you can't place in the exact same column. You could place in a row that intersects that column, but just be aware there's a decent chance that the tile that intersects may be gone by the time it gets to you if you're later in the turn order.
And what's interesting, though, comparing it to Age of Steam, as long as we're going down this path, is that Age of Steam, you always have the same, what is it, five or six options that you can choose from.
Sure.
And it's always going to be the same. And here, it all depends on where it's laid out. And there's a whole puzzle that is just like laid over the usual like top of round choices that you want to make of how you want to power your round or your game. There's a spatial puzzle that's sort of going on. Maybe not a spatial puzzle, but like spatial considerations that have to be made. And then you have to think about, again, if you're not going first, you have to think about where other people are going and what they're going to be picking. And you have to get into people's heads. And it's like this amazing feature of this game that a lesser game would have actually just had this be the whole game. Yeah. A lesser game would have made this, hey, we'll have a round where we all go and we pick something, and then we put in our little tableau, and then we smile, whatever. This one's saying, we're just starting here. And then we still have a whole round that we're going to do. This is just your amuse-bouche of what's going to happen.
But it does, I will say the one negative is that it does allow chance to play a factor. We had a close game when we played this week. And one of the reasons I did as well as I did is that I chose to become the start player, the first player on a round where the tiles just came out right, and not even just a little right. They came out really, really right.
Right. There was no real choice for you there. The correct choice was very obvious.
Everybody would have screamed and jumped on that choice. Yeah.
It didn't feel unfair to me, though, when that happened. I mean, you had first dibs on that great row, but you know what, though? You made the choice to go first. You took a gamble to use one of your precious workers to go first.
Sure.
And you also uniquely positioned yourself that you would have enough money to go into that to take whatever row or column that you would have gotten. Because, yes, you got a really great row.
Yeah.
But you also had a really great game plan. And anyway, I'm not sure that row necessarily won it for you.
Well, I think
you could have taken any row or column and you probably would have done very well. That was an exceptionally great row.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like, you just lucked into something that was great. You had also you would put yourself in a position to take advantage of that luck. So
well, thanks.
I guess that's
I do think
my way of saying that there's you could wind up in a lucky situation, but it doesn't mean anything if you're not ready for it.
Thanks for saying that. I appreciate it. But I do think proper strategy in the game is that if you select to go first, you must collect enough money to have that payoff, right? You must have the coffers to make the choice to go first be worthwhile. And in order to do that, you have to have at least $6 so you can buy 3 tiles potentially, right? I think that's
we had rounds playing this where that was a round where going first had a clear advantage, and then we had other rounds where you looked at the map and been like, the difference between first and third here is really not that significant. So if I can put my game designer hat on here, I think that the market part of this game is really interesting. It's also an example of how randomness in games can be both input and output randomness. Yeah. Because especially when we start the game and we're looking at that grid of tiles, that's almost like pure input randomness. We're looking at the setup. We're going to make our decisions based upon what that setup is. But then when you take start player and then now we're putting out the new tiles, that's more output randomness. You got a good roll for the way the tiles lined up on that round. And then I think the next round I had taken start player because it's going to change every round.
Yeah.
And then it kind of flopped and it's there's so many different ways to go here. I wasn't as rewarded. And that's not a negative. It's just it's an interesting thing about I think when we're talking about chance in games, chance, by the way, can be very fun. I admit that. spent whole segments on it. And and that can be a really fun part of this, but like just making some hard distinction between input randomness and output randomness, often they overlap very strongly, as they do right here.
Yeah, I mean, in the words of Paul, if I do something and it happens to harm you, but I wasn't planning on it, I take no joy in that. If it's when I choose intentionally to harm you, that's where the joy for Paul comes. I think there's a similar thing here, which is that it would have been great if the tiles for the next round are flipped up early, so the decision to grab start player is more meaningful and less roll of the dice. But unfortunately, that's not possible in the game because there is a space you can choose where you can pay $3 to grab a tile that still remains available from this previous round.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah, it's not a huge
I was
deal.
thinking the same thing. Is like, no, you can't really do it because of that action space.
Yeah.
But it's okay to have this, a certain degree of luck in the game. Speaking of Paul, I want to play this game with Paul because there is a really interesting area control part of this game, which is the kind of real estate game on the grid of the city that we're building. And in the same way that we play Age of Steam and we're kind of butting heads over grabbing territory and building lines, there's an aspect of this game that can be very aggressive. For example, in our game, I played very aggressively at Ben early on in the game,
you did.
And kind of knocked him out. So like people should be more like, this can be one of those games where you're going to be like aggressively gobbling up real estate, and that's probably a good idea. You need to make sure you have a place to build.
And let's say the game probably plays best at 4 because of that. Because with 3, somebody has open skies, right? Somebody's got room to grow no matter what. Whereas
the map expands based upon player count. I would like
minorly,
play it
not
for,
but meaning that like you were in my business, but no one was in Tom's business. But maybe it should have been like a little bit of a rock paper scissors thing, because one of the things that I did not do in that game was I sat down and I was like, I'm playing my strategy. I'm going to try this strategy. I had a power that said you can build level 2 and level 3 buildings at a discount, because what happens is every round new buildings become available for you to build. And so I could build level 2 and 3s at a discount. So in my mind, I was like, I'm just going to build a whole bunch of level 2s, and I'll be able to build them for cheap. I'm going to spam the board, and then I'm going to convert them, over for prestige to get me a lot of prestige. But what I wasn't doing was I wasn't actually looking at the game state and seeing, TREY is being an aggressive, he's gobbling up all this land, and Tom is sort of doing it too. And instead, I was just focused on my strategy, and then just sort of got wedged into this weird little corner. And the game, it doesn't tell you to do this, but you have to be aware that like, if people are gobbling up land, you got to gobble up land too, because all those buildings that you want to lay down, there's no point in laying them down if you're not going to be able to position them in a way that you're going to get be able to sort of like get that to pay off with endgame prestige, which is generated by placing these little public parks around the board. And any buildings that are surrounded by public parks at the end of the game are going to generate certain amounts of prestige for you. And if you position your buildings correctly and your parks correctly, you can wind up in a situation where you are scoring a lot of prestige. And something that is really unique to this game is the way you get your victory points in this game is through prestige. And it's this very interesting system, which I actually like quite a bit, but it confuses people a lot at first, which is that every time you build a building, or you can also do this thing called like funding event, because, it's a cloud city. So there's like these fans that keep it afloat, but there are these events. So anytime you basically fund event, or think of it like Bette Midler adopting a highway. Okay. It's like, that's what it is. You're Bette Midler over there. And so, you're either funding event or you're building
the exact same thing. Strangely,
exactly. Yes. Yeah.
I
mean, Trey was thinking Michael Richards adopting a freeway, but it's a similar concept. Yeah.
I prefer Bette Midler than Michael Richards in this case. But what happens is you have like a little house, and it's like a little house tracker, and it goes up and it goes up and it goes up, and it's gonna be it'll go up this track, and it'll be at a certain value, like maybe 3 or 4 or 5. It doesn't necessarily reflect how many buildings you've built, but that's the number that
your contribution to the city.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so when you score prestige, Prestige is scored on the big scoring track on the board that goes all around the border. And every time it passes by a multiple of 10, you get to score your points. And the amount of points you get is equal to where your little house is on the housing track. It's basically saying, like, your fame as a developer has reached the masses, and you have created these many vacancies. And so people say, hey, I want to move to that cloud city. So I've got 5 vacancies. So 5 people come in, and that's reflected in, you get 5 points. And so if you get like a surge of prestige points, if you got like 25 prestige points, you could theoretically cross over a multiple of 10 2, maybe even 3 times. So that could be 5 points, 5 points, 5 points. And that's how scoring works. Really funky, hard for some people to grok in a weird way, but very cool, I think.
Yeah, it's not just like it's kind of like most population points wins. So like there's a recognition thing. It's not just that you're doing good stuff, you have to be recognized for it. So there's a little bit of almost like a Concordia thing where like, here's your board presence, and now you're going to get rewarded for your board presence based upon the cards you have. And like having more cards means you're going to be rewarded more times for various things.
That's right.
It's kind of a similar thing where you've got your contribution to the city, but like half of what you're doing is getting your own population, your own building to kind of like sing your praises, so that you're going to be recognized more for what you've done. So like, even though this is like a cloud game, it's a real estate development game, and almost like a perception game. It's like, it's not just that I'm contributing to the city, you have to be recognized for contributing to the city. So I agree that that's kind of a hard teach thing, but it's also very cool.
Yeah,
and I think
I think of I think of it as combinatorial scoring is what I would call it, which is that it's not your score is this times this plus this, or it's a larger calculation than simply, okay, I have 30 victory point chits, that's my final score. It is, in Concordia is a perfect example of this. It's what I have, my board presence, but it's times the number of card assets that reward that particular aspect, that particular dimension of the board presence that is going to score my points. And in this one, it is definitely the how many buildings have I built times how much prestige am I generating per round, divided by 10, essentially, is what it comes down to. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it also it sort of gently nudges you into sort of one of two camps, and I'm sure that there's probably a third camp, but you could theoretically build a few buildings, and I've read online and on other I don't know, in various other forms of media, that people have been able to do this strategy where you build a few buildings, but you just jam the gas down on that prestige, and you just make that prestige soar as much as possible. And so even though you only have like maybe 4 buildings, you're only going to get 4 points every time you do a prestige scoring. You're scoring that prestige so many times, it's like 4 points, 4 points, 4 points, 4 points. Or you can say, I want to have a bunch of buildings, so maybe I'm at like 7 or 8, and I may not have as many prestige scorings, but every time I do score that prestige, I'm scoring a lot more points every time I do it. So there's like a little bit of a tension there of how do you want to, how many buildings do you want to have before you really start getting that prestige going?
Yeah.
This is a point that I especially want to like hang a light on, because I think like as Eurogamers, we're all kind of familiar with the concept of the pivot. Like there's the point in the game where we're doing engine building, and then we're kind of like switching into score generation, right? And like a lot of times we'll play a game and say, oh yeah, I pivoted too late, or I pivoted early. Like sometimes Paul explicitly plays games where he's gobbling up points early on and then trying to hold on versus other people's engines that are trying to do late scoring. And like this game definitely has that same kind of pivot dynamic, but I haven't seen it before where it's like explicitly in the mechanisms of the game, the way the buildings here are, where it's like every single building you build has 2 different modes. They essentially have like a resource generating of various kinds mode on the top versus a prestige mode at the bottom. And you can take actions to actually change the functionality of your buildings to kind of vary with mechanical terms, saying I'm switching from engine building to scoring mode in this game. And when you do that, it is really important. It's a really important part of the decision space.
Yeah, and the thing is this, with one thing we also haven't really talked about is what these buildings do is that you're not just like putting down buildings and it's fun. You're just each building, it generates income for you. And resources are so tight in this game between money and resources. You use resources to build buildings, and you use money to buy land. You use money to buy those tiles in the beginning, and you use money to fund events. So those things are so tight that it's important to get buildings up because buildings give you income so you can get a lot of free stuff at the end of the round. And on top of that, when you build the buildings, you get to go up on that building track. So that way, when you score prestige, you have buildings to show for it. And there will inevitably come a moment where you say to yourself, if I do this, I'll get prestige and I'll get to score. But I don't want to score just yet because I want to get my building up another notch. But if I focus on getting my building up another notch, I'm maybe not focusing on grabbing that land territory. And oh no, TREY just took those 3 spots, and now I can't build my park there, all because I was focusing on squeezing out one more building before I get a prestige. And these things all intertwine in a really deep, fascinating way. Because like I said before, if someone's grabbing a lot of territory, you might want to think to yourself, I got to grab territory. But it's also really important to use your limited actions to build those buildings because you need that income. You need that income really badly, especially if that income is going to involve getting you some money to set you up to go into the market phase.
So, folks, are you hearing that we're kind of so-so about this game?
We could talk about some negatives.
We should.
I think we should.
And we should because we want to be fair and balanced. I hate that I use that term. Continue.
Yeah, you did. All right. So first thing of here's some complaints. The iconography. For whatever reason, I don't have a problem with it, but it's definitely, I've heard a number of people be confused about the iconography in the game.
Yes.
This is not the simplest teach. Is this something you wanted to talk about, Ben?
Yeah, I would say that I would say the majority of people that I've taught this game to, I played this game a lot. The majority of people I've taught it to have had emotional reactions to it similar to the 3 of us. But I would say there's always maybe one person or so, or there's always, I'm always surprised. There's always someone like Jesse. We played this with Jesse. He did not like it. And I think one of his barriers to entry was some of the components and the iconography just got in the way of his ability to grok certain things. And also it also got in the way of his ability to sort of feel like he was part of this world. It's something that comes up. There are component issues that plagued this game. When it first came out in 2015, there was a lot of talk about how different pieces didn't match this color or that color. They looked too similar. There were numbers that were incorrect in the scoring track. There's all those things. You also have and you have a rule book that had ambiguities. Some of those ambiguities they've cleaned up a lot with the TNG version, but
we still got some rules
linger.
Confusion. Yep.
Yeah.
And we should say real quick, the new version by Tasty Minstrel ran into a production problem. There was a mold issue on some of the games that were released, and they had a recall that they. I'm glad that they issued that recall, but there was a problem with some of the components. So this game was a little cursed in some ways.
Yeah.
With the art style of this game, you might not have been able to spot the mold, though, because I love the art style of this game, but I think some people are turned off by it. For me, it's got kind of this muted early 70s pop or kind of psychedelic art style. That to me reads like somewhere between Yellow Submarine and Mari Sendak.
Yes.
But I do know, I have encountered people that look at that art and it's a turnoff. So that's very personal preference.
It's not clean.
It's also not
dirty,
photogenic.
Right?
I have to say I've been following the Dilluvia project since it came out. Rado did a run through of it, and also there was someone who used to write reviews on Board Game Geek named Mina, who was great. She had great taste, and she profiled this. And every picture I saw of the game, I was like, yeah, it looks cool, but it looks kind of I don't know about this art. It looks just sort of this big mess of white and light greens. But when you actually play the game, when you actually unload this board, the board is much bigger than you would expect. It's this big board. It has a presence, and I think it's beautiful in person. It really pops, sort of like the way Concordia pops. I feel like Concordia, if you look at pictures on the internet, you're like, okay, that's a map. But then when you actually put it out there, it's like, oh, it looks cool.
All right, so a few other criticisms here that we've had having played it. I think I don't feel like I've played it enough to really say this definitively, but one thing we acknowledged or seemed to think is that there's a number of like end game scoring tiles that just don't seem to reward as much as they should to make the investment in them. Like they seem costed wrong for some of these.
Yeah.
I think the game to me feels a little too long. I was having a great time playing it because I love the game. I don't mind that it runs long, but this is longer than probably our standard medium heavyweight Euro that we play. And then like my final criticism is I do think it is a little too mathy for some people. And I don't think it's even the like, prestige times cities things, which is borderline too mathy. It's that they actually like carry it all the way through. Like, for example, at the end of the game, we're scoring our parks and we're counting up the number of, building size spaces around the parks, and we're adding that all up. And like, then we have to multiply that by our, city score. And like, it ends up being this thing where like, well, I've got, 24 points of parks, but I'm only scoring 8 points times that. And so that's going to end up being this many points. It's like that could have just easily been parks just give you points straight up, because our multiplier was like, 8 or 9 at that point. So it's like, why not just make that victory points at the end? That wouldn't have been so terrible.
I don't think it's to me personally. I don't have as much of an issue with that because you just move your prestige up and you see how many times you pass the 10. And you say, okay, I passed the 10 3 times. I got 8, it's 24 points, and I moved my thing up 24 points. To me, that's not hard. I think that the math, I'm not saying that you think it's hard. I'm just saying for me, it's not a challenge. But for me, I think there's actually more math in terms of how you have to budget your money, and you have to budget your workers, and you have to budget your various resources. And then you're thinking about how much money do I have left over for the next round. And then also, like, if I do this, it's going to get me, if I switch this over to prestige now, I'm going to get this much prestige and income. And then if I get this much prestige and income, will it get me to score? And how many times will it get me to score? So there's a lot of just like internal budgeting, which I think
But that may be what I mean about mathy.
Yeah.
Like you said, you're doing a lot of internal budgeting. I think if Dimitri were here, I'm not sure he would say, ooh, internal budgeting. That sounds fun.
Yeah. But I think actually it is really fun.
Oh,
I think
too,
but I think
Not for everybody.
that when you see this game, it in many ways, this is just it's a straightforward worker placement game. I mean, it's just like you take your actions and you use those actions to gain resources, claim land, build buildings, and then you have a few other sort of like side things that you can do. But that's basically what you're doing. But it is, I think, a lot heavier than people would realize, and it is a lot longer. And I, like you, don't have any problem with the length. But I think maybe some people see this cute sort of like big cloud city game with just worker placement, and they think it's just going to be like a 2-hour game of fun choices. And it's like, this is gonna burn your brain. It is going to wear it down to like a mush, just so you know, in a way that's really excellent. And you have to be prepared. This is a game. This is a long game. It is always a long game. And people need to be prepared for that.
Yeah.
It's not crazy long. It's not Dune.
No.
But it's like
it's probably
it always
about
takes me like 3.5 to 4 hours.
It's a half an hour to an hour longer than a lot of other games of this length. And maybe that'll become shorter than when we played it enough, when we got enough reps in and we're a little faster on it. But look,
I don't know, because there's always these deep decisions. And I have to say, one thing that's kind of amazing about the game is when I first started to play it, after the first play 1 or 2 games, I was like, is this going to become samey? Because it's always the same buildings that you have to choose from. There's no variety. It's always the exact same buildings. But how the market tiles you choose and what other people do really dictates how you use those buildings. And the truth is there's many different interesting ways, because you don't always have to build the newest, freshest building that gets revealed. You can decide, I'm just going to work on the small ones. And there's a strategy where you build only small buildings. And when you build only small buildings, they're cheap and they get your building tracker that gets to go up high, but they may not give you as many rewards later on, right? Or you can go for medium
your
or big.
income becomes smaller that way.
Yeah, so it's really fascinating in that way. And one thing I want to talk about as a detriment a little bit is the income board. I think it was like a noble attempt at like a clever income tracking board where the personal board, you have like you have this big cloud track, a big track that's made of clouds. And as your resource income and prestige income and money income goes up, you've got these little banners that you move along, and it sort of snakes along, and multiple banners like it's like what's it called? Gaia Project. Multiple things can be on the same track to indicate where you are with your income. It winds up just sort of being sloppy and unwieldy, and people get confused because the housing track is on that too, but the housing track moves at a different rate. I kind of wish there was just like one big board, one central board that we just all had, like, here's the income.
Because we should be paying attention to where everyone else is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It should be more central.
I didn't mind it terribly much because we are tracking 4 different incomes essentially in the game, so that's a lot of tracking to be done, and I thought it was.
But Ben's example of Gaia kind of does this right.
Yeah.
Like, we all have those various tech tracks. You can see where everybody is.
Yep.
And I could see, Tom's ahead on the house track.
Yeah.
Ben's ahead on the income track. I'm doing well on the resource. Like, it's defining our games. Like, that should be kind of central core information that everybody's looking at. And as opposed to me, like, it's a little bit different than like in Agricola. It was like, Tom's doing, he's doing his farm animals thing, and Ben's doing a lot of vegetables and grain.
Right.
This is a little bit more central. All right, so I have a final confession.
Actually, I just want to say one more thing about that. Aside from the fact that the actual banners that you put on there, they're like a little bit too large. They cover up too much information.
Yeah.
But this is actually the biggest iconography issue that you brought up. When you talk about iconography, this is the number one issue, is that there's prestige income and there's prestige that you score, and there's no difference in those icons. And when you build a building and the building increases your prestige income, that's the only way you move up your little prestige income thing on your scoring track. And any other instance where you would receive income is on the main track. And for me, I had no problem sort of like internalizing that idea, but there are a lot of people who, whenever they get prestige, they're like, okay, do I move this one or do I move this one? Do I move my score track or this one?
The difference between income and actual, like, immediate reward.
Yeah.
Right.
And it gets to
Which
be
is kind of an Age of Steam thing too, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Trey, you were about to say something final, because I have some final things to say as well.
Yeah. And then I'll let you go after that. So Tom, I have a confession.
Uh-oh.
I don't think I've ever said this before, but I was glad that you won our game with Ben. Like, first time, I was happy Tom won. I think that was a great game. That was my first game of the Dilluvia project where nobody needed to teach, and like everybody knew what they were doing and playing well. And I think that like my fear about this game, or my concern, was that this game was just going to be an efficiency contest. Like, because you're constantly like just trying to get a little bit of edge about efficiencies with your actions, and like whoever's like the most efficient might win. Like, that was my fear. Mm-hmm. And instead, like, you grabbed a tech tile early that put you on a very different growth curve than
that I've never seen been used properly or well. I've never seen anyone use that.
Yeah, like Ben, you and I were doing a much more standard growth progression. Like, our games weren't that different. And like there was I almost had a fear of like some of these moves are a little bit scripted. Like the 0 round building is very good because that's how you get extra workers, and like I can't resist that. I have to do it. But Tom didn't. Tom was behind us on the worker growth curve.
Generally, something you do not do.
Right.
Right, but it worked out. And it was also like, Ben, you and I were on kind of a standard, steady progression. And then, Tom, you were taking these turns that were like, turn 1 was just grab tons of resources, but don't build anything. And then turn 2, you built, game-defining buildings. And it seemed like ours was much more of like this steady ramp, and yours was much more of, I'm grabbing this turn, and the next turn I'm building. And so it was like on, off, just playing a very different game. And I think like as we get to know the game better and employ those tech tiles a little bit better, we'll see, okay, this game really has some depth, and it has a multiple paths of victory, and like and different rhythms in how you even play it. And
yeah, I mean, I have played, Ben taught me this game however long ago, year and a half ago or something along those lines. And I told him that day, I was like, this is probably in my top 3 games of this year. I mean, it's way up there. I was really captivated by it, and I've played it I've played it every now and again since then. I very much enjoy teaching it to people, and I really think it's kind of exceptional.
And the thing is, by the way, what Trey was saying about how like there are different rhythms, et cetera. One of those scoring tiles, and we didn't really get back to it, but you were talking about you didn't feel like those scoring tiles, they may be overpriced. I've seen those scoring tiles actually have an impact. And in fact, the other day, you guys were separated by about 2 points at the end. So if you were able to somehow get one of those, that could have been a huge difference. Of course, asterisk, because if you take that tile, you don't take something else that gets you up to that point level.
At what cost? Yeah.
But there is one of those scoring tiles is if you have the most workers, then you get a certain number of points, which seems to imply that there's
it's only 4 points. That just seems insignificant.
Right, but what I'm saying is that the fact that that's a scoring condition almost implies that there's a way you can play this game where you don't take as many workers as everyone else, and that like maybe you do play, like maybe there's a way. I've seen Jesse play this now. I played it with Jesse twice now, and both times he didn't take workers, and he was very competitive with us because if you don't build your worker building, you could instead build a building in that first round that starts giving you income. And if you receive a resource and a coin, that's the same as actually putting 2 workers out. So you can totally you don't have to follow some of the rules that we kind of inherently follow with these sort of games.
Yeah. So my final thing on this is that you heard us. We seem to like the game. We have concerns. We have things that aren't great about it. But here's the thing about this game. There are 90 comments in the forums for the game. All the forums, only 90. There's only 90 comments on this game, period. There is not a single strategy article. And out of those 90 comments in the forums, I think half of them are from Ben Mandelker.
Tracks.
I am only slightly exaggerating. He is all over this thing. This game is ranked 2,465 on Board Game Geek. I'm not going to say it's in my top 100, but I think this game is in my top 200. I think it is way up there. It is a very, very...
it's top 100. It's probably top 50 for me.
Yeah.
It might even be... If I neglected to put this on my top 20 when we did our top 20 thing, I'm surprised if I neglected it. It may have just been because there have been other games that I've had a little bit longer, but it's an excellent game.
Yeah, it's criminally unknown and undiscovered, and I think it is. This is a fun episode to do because I really feel like we're panning for gold and we're spinning the plate around, and there's something glittering at the bottom of it, and it's Dilluvia Project. I could not more highly recommend. Where can we play it online right now?
It's on Tabletop Simulator. I would say, and what's great is it's actually got a great mod.
It's a good mod.
It's the TMG version, and I would say for me, I mean, anything negative I've said about this game is like nothing more than a quibble. I think it's like an exceptional game. It would have been my number 1 game of last year if Barrage hadn't come around. I actually think my only area where I'm like, oh, I really wish they could have fixed that is if they had put just like one more sort of like little sheen on the thematic elements. I think that all the resources, they don't even have a name. You can come up, you can name them things. I like to call like the white clouds or whatever, starlight, but they don't even have a name. The Grande Worker, we call it the Grande Worker. It doesn't have a name. The artwork of the board is really cool, but I think the artwork of the buildings, like if you look at them close up, you're like, oh, that's a building. But when you put them out on the board, it doesn't look like a whole bunch of buildings. It doesn't look like a city that's developing. Yeah. I would have loved like just a little more something. I actually went and I pimped my copy just slightly. I bought a bunch of those little Catan settlement houses. So instead of using the cubes, because by the way, this game also has like a shortage of components when you play in real life. It's so annoying.
Yeah.
So I bought like a whole bunch of little blue houses in every color. So that way, when you put your building down on the map, it's not like a little cube that sits on the building to show what your income is. There's a little house, so it looks a little bit more like it's getting populated. And like I'm not a minis person, but there's a part of me that thinks like this game would have the most incredible table presence if they had minis that you could put down on these types of buildings for these buildings in that center and see this city sort of like physically grow. That's a big ask. I'm not saying that TMG or anyone should do that, but it's like one of those things like, gosh, wouldn't that just be so wonderful? I just like if there was just like that one more little like, if they cleaned up some of the income trackers,
Now listen, the art is done by Harold Leesky, who did the art for La Granja, which we just talked about last week. He's a very good designer, but there's something about it that's just not quite popping the way it could. I wonder what would happen if Ian O'Toole could get his hands on this, and what would happen. But Harold Leesky is a very good art designer, and I think
it's a fantastic game.
I love
it. Is a fantastic game with so much depth. It's just like perfection as worker placement. I think actually the fact that, again, this game came out 2015, but it more or less sort of came out, I guess it was, I don't remember, it was 2018, 2019, whenever it came out.
Late 18, yeah.
Okay, late 18. But like, to me, I got it within a month of receiving my copy of Barrage, and to suddenly have these two spectacular worker placement games in my collection was like a dream. It was a gift from the board gaming gods. It is like, it is a great undiscovered gem. Like, it is just so great.
Okay, I'm stopping you now. Okay, we're running really late.
Fine.
Dilluvia Project, we have some strong opinions about it. It is going to be a hard game to find. We will say that. But when you have an opportunity to find it, grab yourself a copy. Write the wonderful people at Tasty Minstrel Games and ask them to get that restocked ASAP, because it is a diamond in the rough. It is a treasure. And we recommend that you check it out.
Hey, if you enjoyed that video, you very well might enjoy the other videos you now see being suggested to you on screen. Also, we'd greatly appreciate it if you could like, share, or subscribe to our Game Brain channel. Thanks so much.